other one, you bastard!
Brought to you by supporters who probably have better taste than this schmuck.
Final Space, a show loved by many for its clever mix of comedy and science fiction. In a world where adult comedy animation can appear stagnant at times, this was a show that resonated with many and rose above the general mediocrity. However, striking a chord with audiences and creating a die-hard fanbase doesn't mean jack shit in the eyes of corporate bigwigs. On September 25th, 2022, the show's creator announced that Final Space had not only been cancelled, but turned into a tax write-off. Under this designation, the show can no longer be re-released in any form, and also cannot be shopped around to other networks for continuation. The IP has, effectively, been murdered so that millionaires can get a big fat fancy paycheck. I have never seen a single episode of this show. Final Space doesn't really stick out to me as particularly interesting in terms of my tastes. I have nothing against it and assume it's well made, but it's not something I have a desire to engage with. However, it did get me thinking. Everywhere I go, animation is being treated like shit. Over and over, corporations are reaping the benefits of animation's popularity whilst also plummeting it into the ground. There's no single issue that I can point to and say this is what's ruining animation today, but rather countless conundrums weaved into a wicked problem. Shows being turned into tax write-offs is nothing new. We've seen it quite often before, but in this new context, it is but the tip of the iceberg. And what lies beneath, you may ask? Well, my dear Cybertronians, the start of a new period of animation. Welcome to the 2020s. Welcome to the new dark age.
You are now entering Diagnosis Insanity.
Anywho, let's start off with the big one, as well as the most recent. Warner Brothers has always been a titan of the animation industry. The Looney Tunes practically wrote the book on animation, least between them and Disney. Warner Media pioneered consistent cartoon programming with Cartoon Network decades ago, providing a home for animated content in a world that consistently pushes cheaply made live-action schlock. Not saying all live-action was schlock, but back in the heyday of television, it was often like finding a needle in a haystack. Cartoon Network offered a break from all of that, and even to this day they still keep churning out timeless projects. Even prior to the merger with Discovery, however, cracks were starting to show. Infinity Train, an anthology series where each season followed a different story arc, took the world by storm. I remember back when I was still at Sydney University, I'd talk to my classmates about how amazing the first season was. The way the Playgrounds Carriage episode hits you like a truck. Everyone on campus that was into animation was talking about that shit, and the show only got better from there. Such a creative show with infinite potential. It's like goddamn Doctor Who in that it can do anything but still have a continuous continuity. Only they're even more free with their storytelling because they can cover different people and cancelled because it wasn't kid-friendly enough. In an age where the line between kids and adults television is getting blurred further and further, this was already a bad move. That said, perhaps it was an omen for things to come, because after these two bastards did the most unholy fusion dance you could think of, oh boy, things got worse. Now, I'm not saying this merger should never have gone through to begin with. Truth be told, over the past few years, they haven't exactly had the best track record. They already tried merging with AT&T, and that kinda crashed and burned. And on the animation side of things, they ended up putting all of their eggs in the Lego Project basket. Those movies are great, don't get me wrong, but people ended up getting burned out pretty quickly, and as such, we're not seeing many cinema-released animation contents from them. COVID probably isn't helping on that front though. Either way, a merger was kinda inevitable, but Jesus Christ, this is the worst way to do it. In the process of this unholy gut-eye, two problems emerged. Firstly, you've got this fucker somehow taking control of both Discovery and Warner Brothers. If you take a look at his resume, you'll notice he's been more closely linked with reality television than long-term narrative production, so is already coming into this with certain biases. Then you've got all the investors who are asking for a big old $3 billion increase to their bonuses. Obviously, that guy's gonna take that money out of what he assumes isn't necessary, and of course pop those words into the biggest goddamn quotation marks you can imagine. And how does he take money out of the business? Why, cutting off access, of course. Suddenly, at the drop of a hat, shows stop airing and viewing on cable and streaming services. Were you a fan of those shows? You, I guess. It's not just Final Space that has gone missing. Shows like Mau Mau got the axe too. Hell, Sesame Street lost hundreds of episodes from HBO Max. Yes, that's not animation per se, but it still shows the absurdity. Then you've got oddities like Iron Giant being removed from streaming. Seems odd given they basically own the damn thing, but you gotta realize labor laws surrounding animation were a bit different back then. Those films require residual pay. Most modern shows don't. Gig economy, stable economy. Different systems, things have gotten worse. Honestly, I don't need to tell you how insulting this is. I'm not saying every person on the planet has to like animation as a medium, but those that do should be treated with respect. People signed up to HBO Max and paid hundreds of dollars for cable to access Cartoon Network, and so that a few parasites on the investors board can have a girthy bonus. For practically doing nothing, so many of those beloved shows are being taken away. I doubt it's any coincidence that two separate rumors started circulating in regards to Cartoon Network, one claiming it was shifting to live action content and another claiming they're shutting down entirely. Sure, rumors can be baseless at times. Think about how many Nintendo Switch Pro leaks came out over the past several years, but something's telling me these ideas are at least floating around the office. At this point, I wouldn't put it past Discovery Warner to implement such changes. Over the next decade, we can probably expect Warner Brothers to put out less animated content. Already the Lego content has been pushed over to Universal Media, which people are assuming means DreamWorks, but let's be real, it means Illumination. Yeah, y'all telling me the Mario movie looks great, but I'm still not convinced.
Alright. Let's go.
After the lukewarm reception of Shit Jam 2,
We're in the computer?
Dad.
You know I'm claustrophobic.
Dad.
Where's the elevators?
Dad.
Hey Siri, can you let us out of here, please?
feature-length cinema-released animated content is probably out of the question. We're likely going to see a shift to cheaper projects on Cartoon Network, and any show that hasn't been cancelled yet basically has a 50-50 chance of getting the axe soon enough. They can't just fire everyone at once, under labor laws, so I doubt we've seen the last of cancellations. Much as I hate to admit it, I reckon Harley Quinn Season 4 will be its last. I'd love to be wrong, but let's be real here, a show with non-hetero leads against a traditionally conservative CEO? That's not a matchup I'd bet on.
It's a small world after all.
Honestly, I don't know what makes me madder, the way Warner Brothers handled their scaling back or the actions Disney have taken. While Warner Brothers has only recently gone to shit, Disney's been on this downward spiral for a while now. There's always been hints that it doesn't really value homegrown animated properties as much as big budget licenses. We've seen this shit as far back as 2013 when Disney bought Star Wars and decided it didn't need Tron Uprising anymore. Why bother putting the effort into a unique and interesting world when you can just ride the coattails of one already built for you? In this current decade, it's basically this on a larger scale. DuckTales, The Owl House, and Amphibia. The trinity of high-quality fantasy animation. These three were masterclasses in their own forms of storytelling. Hell, DuckTales is the closest thing to a perfect cartoon I've ever seen. But who cares about that, right? Nobody's watching them anyway, let's cancel them. It's totally not our fault that these were never on Disney Plus until months after the original air dates, with little to no merchandise supporting them. I remember about a year ago seeing a leaked report claiming that these shows were cancelled to funnel more money into Star Wars and Marvel. I tried looking it up again for this video to check the validity of it, but alas, I've had no luck. But if we're taking the shows that Disney Plus has released, there's a lot of evidence to support this claim. Sure, it's mostly anecdotal relating to shows releasing and nothing else, but by God, there's a metric ton of it. And to take their place, we're getting much smaller shows that don't put as much of a strain on their budgets, like Hamster and Gretel. Don't get me wrong, Dan Povenmire is a national treasure that should be protected at all costs, but it shouldn't be one or the other. There should be diversity in animation, given this is the company that, alongside Warner Brothers, made animation what it is today. Not that the CEO of Disney sees it that way, since in his own words,
I always say that when fans and our audiences put their kids to bed at night after watching Pinocchio or Dumbo or Little Mermaid, they're probably not going to tune into another animated movie. They want something for them.
And what takes its place? Marvel and Star Wars tie-ins, of course. While Star Wars has pre-established creative individuals to fall back on and make the shows decent at worst, Marvel just farts out the most boring shit fluff you could possibly imagine. And somehow it got nominated for an Emmy! And what has this budget shifting gotten them? Burnout. that's what. I'm not the only one feeling this. Star Wars and Marvel are just getting stale at this point. It doesn't matter if a show like Andor is the best thing since Beast Wars Retracts. It's just too much. It's getting boring. Again, it shouldn't be a case of either one or the other. Diversity is the spice of life. But Disney has sucked the life out of its creative powerhouse that is their collective of animated properties and shoved it into a force-fed popular culture steam train. The train don't stop, and Disney insists you like it that way. If you want to see the most blatant example of their lack of care for animated properties, remember the advertising for their recently released Strange Worlds? Of course not. Because they haven't advertised it for shit. Yes, obviously they're advertising it in cinemas, but in this day and age, that's essentially the same as doing nothing. Probably doesn't help that the protagonist isn't heterosexual, mind you, but the point still stands. Meanwhile, the live-action Pinocchio is being forced down everyone's throats through constant bus ads, articles, and YouTube pre-rolls. Thank I pay for premium so I don't have to see that shit. The sheer disconnect from the company's roots is staggering. And knowing them and the CEO in charge, it's probably only going to get worse. Variety, because the chart says people enjoy one thing and one thing alone. Consume products because we say it will. Do not mourn the loss of creativity. Watch She-Hulk twerking. Hey, little update. Literally as I was writing this script, rumors started circulating about Spider-Man freshman year being cancelled due to diminishing returns from the MCU. Yes, because that is really what needed cancelling. You, Disney. Okay, update number 2. Current CEO got fired, old CEO is back. Potentially a step in the right direction, but the entire marketing team doesn't just change because a CEO does. A lot of these decisions may continue in the same way. Also, don't forget that Iger isn't exactly a saint himself, spearheading the current direction of Star Wars and being partially, if not fully responsible for Tron Uprising's demise. So, I'll believe a change when I see it. This company isn't as far into the deep end as the others, but I can see the telltale signs that they may go down the same road. Out of all of the most popular streaming services, and I'm saying most popular for a reason because I don't have time to cover some of the smaller ones, Netflix has typically held animation in the highest regard. They've offered the most creative freedom, funding as much as necessary without question. While this has regrettably led to some cases of crashing and burning due to directorial incompetence, it has also led to a consistent stream of fantastic projects. Many of the best animated releases of the past decade wouldn't be possible without the assistance of Netflix. And while there have occasionally been cases of worker abuse, those were always chalked up to the production companies themselves and not Netflix. But regrettably, something is changing. Netflix has, in essence, become ubiquitous with streaming services. It's so ingrained in our social consciousness that we literally have a euphemism called Netflix and chill. But once you get as many people on your service as you can, you're going to reach saturation. Every product on the market rises and falls. And for the first time since its commencement, Netflix isn't making as much money as it used to. Now, the smart thing would be to just accept the financial situation post-COVID isn't the same and understand that other companies taking pieces of the pie are obviously going to cut into other projects. The most sustainable course of action would be to invest in more killer material to keep people enticed. I mean, with the way the other companies are going, it can't be too hard, right? Unfortunately, CEOs and investors are not smart people. They want all the money and they want it now. So what does Netflix do? Why, it starts axing projects left and right.
Oh, hi, Mark.
Granted, it hasn't been that many projects at the moment, but given the trend streaming services are on as of late, it really has me concerned. And then, literally a week afterwards, they proceed to purchase Animal Logic. Don't know if the two correlate, but to me, this screams desperation. Yes, taking a prolific studio like that, an Aussie icon no less, is a neat thing, but when juxtaposed with the corporate fuckery beforehand, seems a bit iffy. Then you've got cases where they're starting to actively engage in shady business practices. In the past, it's mainly been shit on the side of the companies making the animation themselves, but recently, as we've seen with Cuphead, they're f***ing around as well, ordering longer seasons before chopping them up. This of course means the animators get nickeled and dimed for their work, and again, in the gig economy, this means fewer if any residuals. And let's not forget the cases of corporate reshuffling. You like Castlevania? Well, tough shit, they kicked the director off so they could take it in their own direction. Of course, this isn't to be confused with the writer, who was fired for sexual harassment. Rightfully so, but in the case of the director, come the f on, man. Now, as I said, at the moment it's not a complete disregard for the medium, as seen with the other companies, but I'm getting the feeling that there's smoke here, and you know what happens when there's smoke. Yes, they're still putting animation into production. Dragon Prince just released its 4th season, and Arcane is most certainly going to continue to be the powerhouse it's placed itself as. And who could forget Nimona, whisked away from the closure of Blue Sky Animation and able to fully realize its creative vision. Once again, Disney. That said, given industry trends, it seems to me they're becoming a lot more meddlesome. Corporate meddling nearly always leads to a worse product. And in the case of an artistic medium that's so wide and varied, I can't help but wonder, what does the future hold?
I do not agree. This is not for me.
Over the past couple of years, I thought I was witnessing a downfall in quality for animation based on major franchises. Back when I was a child, I remember there being really creative reimaginings of classic properties that brought in new fans all the time. But after researching and putting things into perspective, I came to realize that was just my nostalgia talking. There are plenty of fantastic reimaginings coming out today, and they've all got their diehard fans. She-Ra, Rise of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Hell, this is usually a Transformers channel, so look no further than Cyberverse and Earthspark. The former took quite a while to get going, but once it got to its 2nd season, it really hit its stride. This one arc in season 3, as well as the show's finale, are genuinely some of the best Transformers content out there. And as for the latter, we're only on 10 episodes so far at the time of writing, but especially with the 2 most recent, it's shaping up to be a fantastic series. But what's a constant with all of these? She-Ra has gone down as one of the best written cases of diverse shows in recent memory. Rise pushed television animation to its absolute limits and rivals Studio Trigger productions on their creativity. Cyberverse and what we have of Earthspark are some of the most creative Transformers shows out there, and yet barely anyone outside of the fandom is talking about them. Don't even get me started on BotBots, the most left-field Transformers show in recent memory, and it's getting no coverage whatsoever. Instead of creative shows like these, Netflix has had a massive marketing push for He-Man Revelations. And look at how that turned out. Instead of pushing the really creative Transformers series, Netflix put all of their marketing into the abysmal War for Cybertron trilogy. Until the first part came out and they realized they had a dumpster fire on their hand. And going outside of that, there's a constant push for reboots like Teen Titans Go, the Ben 10 reboots, the Powerpuff Girl reboot, Thundercats Roar. These shows constantly get massive marketing pushes, only to get cancelled a few years later. Except Teen Titans Go. How that show is still going is beyond me. It's not just that these shows aren't great to begin with, they're also really derivative. It's either a serious to the point of being drab take on the show, or the same old comedy style over and over. And either way, the same old shit runs its course and is promptly disposed of. And yet, they get all the marketing, while the actually creative shit gets pushed to the side. I can't be the only one noticing this, right? I can't be the only one out there pushing for these shows to gain recognition, while their parent companies just let them rot. The only reason Cyberverse got its last 2 specials was because Earthspark took too long to produce, and Hasbro needed something else to fill the gap. Rise only got a movie because of fan outcry. Never let anyone tell you it's not okay to harass corporations into getting what you want. It's effective, and corporations aren't people. I guess I just want to see more creative reimagining, and I suppose creatives want to do that also, but they never get the attention they deserve because focus is always put on the low-level garbage. Going back to Disney, they constantly put out advertisements for their live-action remake Drivel, while DuckTales got nothing! The fact that show got 3 seasons as it is surprising in itself. I want to see new stuff based on old properties, not chart-driven lowest common denominator drivel, comedic or otherwise. I never want to see Prime scream, "We are not the Decepticons" ever again in my life. Yeah, I'm aware this is derivative in comparison to comparing each Western conglomerate. It may be a little reductive to put an entire country's animation output into a smaller section than the others, but really, the problems over there are all pretty similar. Now, I don't pretend to be an expert on the entirety of Japanese culture. Nobody is the suppository of all wisdom after all. However, I have been put through a few studies as an international studies student. Now, anime is pretty cool. I don't think I need to reiterate that. The problem is that it's being treated worse now than it ever has been. Already, Japan has a problem with toxic work culture. People are expected to work themselves to near death and sacrifice their social life. They then wonder why there's a declining birth rate, given no one wants to have kids for fear of sacrificing their careers or submitting themselves to maternity harassment. There's always jokes about the death march, and everyone's like, ha ha ha, those wacky Japanese, but this is a serious issue that needs to be overcome. By and large, crunch culture is the norm, but animators animators, well, they're basically engaging in crunch on steroids. A quick look at the seasonal chart reveals that more anime is being produced now than ever has. Churned out again and again, season by season. Most of these are built off the blood of underpaid workers. Everyone's going nuts over Chainsaw Man, but notice how Studio Mappa suspiciously removed one of the key lines surrounding unionization. Could it be to do with the fact that staff are ridiculously underpaid and dangerously overworked? Mappa used to be this cool little studio that broke off from one of the titans to pursue its own path, and since then their quality hasn't gone down at all. The problem is, the treatment of their staff has, and newsflash, nearly every studio is like this. It's not exactly a new thing either. I remember watching Shirobako way back in 2014 and thinking, why is this so rose-tinted? Where's the industry fuckery? Why are these people just having a grand old time with no problems whatsoever? What is this, United Passions? You've got shows like My Sister is a Writer, yes, you can imagine what kind of show it is, where the staff were so frustrated that they wrote hidden messages into the credits in a cry for help, as if the rushed animation didn't scream that enough. Matter of fact, shows like this are actually part of the problem. Weebs tend to hail Japan as the mecca of anime culture, but newsflash, there aren't that many fans of anime in Japan. Given the type of media people like myself consume, the culture surrounding it is typically overrepresented. Legit, there are more fans of anime in comparison to the population in Australia than there are in Japan. Anime is more of an export these days than a domestic product. It's all about boosting that gross national cool. Yes, that is indeed a financial and political term that is used in international discussion. Fucking weird, innit? The problem is, most anime studios don't really take advantage of this. There are exceptions, such as Bones and Trigger, but the majority of studios are still tethered to the extremely limited Blu-ray and domestic anime figure markets. And looking at the sales charts, the issue speaks for itself. Perhaps you could chalk it up to general internal finance culture, trying to keep things within the country. Although that statement is a little more complicated than you might think, though I really don't have time to go into the disconnects between politicians and CEOs and the disillusioned general public, so I'll leave that for you to look up. Point is, Blu-ray sales and domestic merchandise sales are primarily what keeps anime production companies afloat, which is why they're so expensive. Yet, even at that expense, you look at the sales figures, and unless you're idle bullshit corrupting the minds of the innocent, the numbers aren't really adding up. And this isn't something Western fans can really influence either. Unless you buy a Japanese Blu-ray through a freight forwarder or fill your room with copious amounts of merchandise, these studios rarely see a dime of international sales revenue. So the majority of the industry is sandwiched between already toxic work culture and an antiquated economic model. It just isn't sustainable, especially when more anime is being pumped out than ever before. Now that isn't to say every studio follows this business model. Industry titan Studio Ghibli has been known to fight against such practices, although they have other problems going on with their power structures. David Production has often been touted as a safe haven for animators to come and work at after being treated poorly by other productions. This is literally how Fire Force's adaptation came to be, when Shaft animators decided to f*** off after being put through hell. Kyoto Animation was classified as the same, although after the disgusting actions of a certain arsonist, who knows how things are going. Unionization is slowly but surely coming to the industry, but it's going to be decades before it fully establishes itself due to deeply ingrained overwork culture. I mean, already unionization has issues reintegrating into Western society. It's going to be a while. And of course, you've got initiatives like the Animator Dormitory Project. And these are fantastic, but it's sort of like those uplifting stories you hear about students chipping in for their teachers' insulin payments in the United States of the USA. Yes, it's heartwarming, but holy f***, why do students have to chip in for bare necessities? Is that not f***ed up? Again, the most frustrating part is that we as a consumer cannot do anything. We can cancel our subscriptions to Netflix, Disney Plus, and Foxtel because HBO Max doesn't exist in Australia, although why you'd be subscribed to Foxtel anyway is beyond me, but by and large we don't have any control over what happens overseas. And sure, larger companies are stepping in and trying to assist where they can, even ignoring full funding cases like Carol and Tuesday and Tower of God. There's been multiple cases where production companies have just decided to cancel shows for no reason. Real Life and Nanbaka are two incredibly prolific examples. Both examples where the finances just gave up until Crunchyroll stepped in and allowed them to finish it. And I'm greatly appreciative of what they've done. But while these American companies are so hell-bent on ensuring the implementation of fair work practices in Japan, they're kinda just ignoring the internalized issues in the West. Western animators, for the most part, are treated alright. But if you're a voice actor, well, f*** off, I guess. Just go live in your mother's basement and cry yourself to sleep at night because we ain't paying your shit. I'm not particularly sure when this trend started happening, but over the past decade, voice actors have been exploited more and more by an increasing number of studios. It's happening especially often with the advent of anime simuldubbing. They basically started implementing their underpaying tactics from their translators into general recording sessions. Vocal performance isn't something you can just turn up to, do a couple of hours, and then f*** off home. One's voice is a powerful instrument, and it needs immaculate care and training. And yet, for some reason, apparently 35 US an hour is acceptable? I get paid more than that playing a couple of hours of saxophone at a wedding! And it's only getting worse with the merger of Crunchyroll and Funimation. Anti-union practices are becoming more and more common, such as the firing of Kyle McCarley from the simuldub of Mob Psycho 100 Season 3, and they have a whinge about locations and seamless processes, despite the fact they themselves chose to move from Texas where they already had a functioning operation. And remote recording has been a thing since the pandemic. This is nothing new here. More and more, anti-union decisions are being made for the purpose of keeping costs down. War for Cybertron suffered this a lot. Yes, Peter Cullen and Frank Welker aren't completely justified in their annoyance of being recast, but they're bang on when it comes to deliberately choosing non-union talent. Mega props to Earthspark for not repeating the same mistake, by the way. But back to the whole Mob Psycho thing. It's been at least a month, and yet Crunchymation still refuses to sit down and even discuss their poor industry practices. And you know why? Because they can let it blow over. People are just so used to consuming animated content that they'll basically respond,
Oh no. Anyway,
a few weeks later, it'll all be good. I remember people spamming Funimation on the recasting of Reagan, but now, barely a whimper. People have just accepted it and moved on. In fact, if anything, people are too afraid to discuss it after the Bayonetta debacle. Thanks to a certain someone lying about their over-average pay, then insisting people boycott and donate to transphobic and anti-abortion charities, the discussion is now seen as taboo. People see discussion on voice actor pay, and all they can think of is Helena Taylor. The damage of this event is going to last for a very long time, and it's frustrating as shit because it's a genuine issue. Look, this video is a mess. I know that. It's a jumble of issues loosely connected, and no one problem is the main contributor to the current state of animation, but that's kind of the point. There's no one single point that primarily puts us in this abysmally shitty state. The closest you can get is corporate greed, but even then, that doesn't affect every facet. I just keep seeing issue upon issue upon issue upon issue, and I have to wonder when there'll be a breaking point. There will never be a shortage of masterfully crafted animated works, but throughout history there's always been periods where things take a dip, where we get stuck in an abundance of shitty projects. A drought of creativity quenched by a few projects here and there. Seeing the way animation is being treated now, I can see us going down this road again. I don't want to see this happen. I want to be wrong. I want everything to be fixed where experimental independent projects continue to take the world by storm. I want to be surprised by the most unlikely of shows. I want a world where Spider-Verse 2 and 3 pave the way for the return of cinema-released feature-length animated movies. But no, from all sides, animation is being f***ed in the ass without consent. And as consumers, we don't really have a lot of power to stop it. The people who do have power have such warped priorities that they rather tank their own companies on the backs of poorly thought-out fluff than admit that animation is a brilliant artistic medium, not a throwaway genre. I can see more shitty uninspired reboots replacing well-thought-out reinventions, more unnecessary spin-offs getting greenlit while creative animated series are cancelled, more bottom-of-the-barrel adaptations being shut out into the world while animators bleed from their fingers. Something has to change, or rather, everything has to change. But change that big just doesn't happen. As such, the way I see it, I have to welcome you, because very soon we are going to enter the new dark age of animation.